9 expert hikers cut open their tent from the inside and ran barefoot into a blizzard. That is not how you survive. That is how you die. And on February 2, 1959, all 9 did exactly that. The tent was found 3 weeks later on a remote Ural Mountain slope. Inside, warm clothes, boots, food. Outside, footprints leading downhill into darkness. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student with years of winter hiking experience. His team consisted of 8 fellow students and graduates from Ural Polytechnic Institute, plus 1 additional member. All were seasoned outdoorsmen. This was supposed to be a challenging but routine expedition to reach Ural Mountain. They set out on January 27. The plan was simple: trek 300 kilometers through the northern Urals, plant a flag on Ural, return as heroes. The difficulty rating was Category 3, the highest in Soviet mountaineering. But for this group, it should have been achievable. They had the equipment. They had the training. They had each other. On January 28, one member, Yuri Yudin, turned back due to illness. He was the only survivor. Not because he was lucky. Because he left. Years later, he would say the decision to turn back saved his life, but the guilt never left him. He spent decades searching for answers about what killed his friends. The remaining 9 continued. They sent occasional updates back through messengers they encountered. Everything seemed normal. They were on schedule, in good spirits. Their last known camp was on February 1, at the base of a mountain the local Mansi people called Kolat. In their language, it means dead mountain. They should have paid attention to that name. When they failed to check in after reaching Ural, no one panicked immediately. Dyatlov had told them the return might be delayed. But by February 20, families demanded action. Search parties deployed. On February 26, searchers found the tent on the slope of Kolat. What they saw made no sense. The tent was cut open from the inside. Long, deliberate slashes. Not small openings for ventilation, massive tears someone had hacked through while inside the tent. Outside, the searchers found footprints. 8 or 9 sets. Some barefoot. Some in socks. Some in a single boot. All heading downhill toward the tree line, 1.5 kilometers away. Inside the tent, boots, warm clothes, cameras, journals. Everything you need to survive a night at -30 degrees Celsius. They had left it all behind. The footprints suggested they left in a hurry but walked calmly at first, no sign of running or panic in the snow. Then the tracks disappeared where wind had erased them. At the forest edge, 1.5 kilometers from the tent, searchers found the first 2 bodies under a large cedar tree. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. Both wearing only underwear. Frozen solid. Near them, the lower branches of the cedar had been broken off up to 5 meters high. Someone had climbed this tree. Someone had been watching something. Between the cedar and the tent, searchers found 3 more bodies. Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. They had been heading back toward the tent. Each was found at increasing distances from the cedar, 300 meters, 330 meters, 480 meters. Each had died of hypothermia. Each had almost made it back. Almost. 5 bodies found. 4 still missing. The search continued for 2 months. In May, when the deep snow finally melted, searchers discovered a ravine 75 meters from the cedar tree. At the bottom, under 4 meters of snow, they found the remaining 4. And this is where the case transforms from mysterious to genuinely disturbing. The ravine bodies were dressed better than the others. They wore clothes stripped from the first victims, pieces of Doroshenko's and Krivonishenko's clothing. Someone had carefully cut clothes from frozen corpses and distributed them among survivors. This means some lived longer than others. Some made rational decisions while freezing. They tried to survive. But their injuries were wrong. Ludmila Dubinina had massive chest trauma, ribs broken, heart hemorrhaged. Alexander Zolotaryov had similar injuries. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles had major skull damage. The medical examiner noted these injuries required extreme force comparable to a high-speed car crash. But there were no external wounds. No broken skin. The damage was entirely internal. The examiner specifically stated no human force could cause such damage. One victim's chest was crushed with such power that the heart was compressed. Another had her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips missing. The original report noted the tongue was removed at the root. The eye sockets were empty. The report offered no explanation. In the weeks after the discovery, the Soviet government closed the investigation abruptly. The conclusion: death by compelling natural force. That was it. No details. No specific cause. The case files were sealed. The area was closed to hikers and explorers for 3 years. Families were told not to discuss it publicly. Something had scared the authorities enough to bury the truth. For decades, theories multiplied. Avalanche was the obvious answer, except there was no avalanche debris. The tent stood intact, just slashed open. The slope angle was too gentle for avalanche conditions. And avalanches don't explain why they'd run toward a ravine rather than to the side. Experienced mountaineers know how to react to avalanche danger. This wasn't it. The Mansi people, indigenous to the region, were briefly suspected. But Mansi hunters testified they were nowhere near the area. The footprints showed only the 9 hikers. No evidence of other humans. And the Mansi had no motive, they had good relationships with hikers. They helped search parties. They mourned the deaths. This wasn't tribal revenge. This was something else. Then came the stranger details from the investigation files. Some clothing showed elevated radiation levels up to 50 times background radiation. Not dangerously high, but unexplained. Another group of hikers 50 kilometers south reported seeing orange spheres in the night sky on February 1. Soviet military also reported similar lights. The government dismissed this as irrelevant. But families remembered. Military tests became the popular theory. The Urals housed secret installations. Testing grounds for rockets, weapons, experimental aircraft. What if the hikers stumbled onto something they shouldn't have seen? What if they were exposed to a weapon test, something that caused panic, internal injuries, and forced the government to cover it up? This theory gained traction when documents revealed that in 1959, the Soviet military was indeed testing parachute mines in the region, explosive devices dropped from aircraft that detonate above ground, creating massive pressure waves. The injuries matched: internal trauma, no external wounds. But the hikers were 300 kilometers from the test range. And the government never admitted to any test that night. Infrasound presented another possibility. In certain wind conditions, mountains can generate low-frequency sound waves below human hearing range. These waves cause intense psychological effects: panic, dread, disorientation. Some researchers proposed the mountain generated infrasound that night, driving the hikers into irrational fear. They fled not from a real threat, but from an overwhelming psychological compulsion. The problem with infrasound: it doesn't explain the physical injuries. Panic could explain cutting the tent and running. It doesn't explain crushed ribs and missing tongues. And the hikers' journals showed no signs of psychological distress before that night. They were experienced enough to recognize altitude sickness or hypothermia-induced confusion. They would have written about feeling strange. They didn't. In 2019, 60 years after the incident, the Russian government reopened the investigation. Officially to provide closure to families. They formed a commission, reviewed all evidence, consulted modern experts. After analyzing avalanche patterns, injury mechanics, and weather data, they reached a conclusion: a small slab avalanche during the night, followed by hypothermia deaths and post-mortem animal scavenging. The 2019 conclusion satisfied almost no one. Avalanche experts pointed out fundamental problems. The slope angle was 23 degrees, well below the 30-degree minimum for slab avalanches. There was no crown fracture, no debris field, no collapsed slope. the tent was intact enough to photograph. If an avalanche hit with enough force to crush chests, it would have buried or destroyed the tent completely. A 2021 study in Switzerland used advanced avalanche modeling to argue a delayed slab avalanche could occur on such a slope under specific wind loading conditions. The theory: they cut into the slope to set up the tent, creating instability. Hours later, a small slab released, injured some while they slept, causing panic. They fled, then died of cold. The injuries happened inside the tent, not in the ravine. But this still doesn't explain everything. If the avalanche happened inside the tent, why did they cut it from inside instead of digging out? Why were the most severe injuries on people found in the ravine, not near the tent? Why did they walk calmly down the slope at first, rather than running in panic? And why were the three returning to the tent? What did they think would protect them there? The missing tongue remains unexplained by any official theory. Scavengers was the official answer. Animals removed soft tissue after death. But the medical examiner in 1959 specifically noted the tongue was removed at the root, not gnawed away. And no other soft tissue damage appeared in the report. Just tongue, eyes, lips. Precision removal. Nothing else touched. Yuri Yudin, the lone survivor who turned back early, spent his life investigating his friends' deaths. He reviewed every document, interviewed every witness, visited the site repeatedly. Before his death in 2013, he said he believed it was an avalanche combined with bad decisions. But he also said the missing tongue haunted him. Some things, he admitted, he couldn't explain no matter how hard he tried. Today, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains classified as an unsolved mystery by most researchers outside Russia. The site has become a pilgrimage destination for mystery enthusiasts and experienced hikers. Memorials stand near the pass. The mountain is still called Kholat Syakhl. Dead Mountain. 9 people went up. 0 came down alive. And after 65 years, we still don't know exactly why. The truth might be simpler than we want to believe. Maybe it was just cold, darkness, confusion, and a series of fatal mistakes by exhausted people. Or maybe something happened on that mountain that the evidence can't fully capture, something that turned 9 experts into panicked victims who died in the snow. Either way, the Dyatlov Pass incident stands as a reminder that some mysteries resist solving, no matter how hard we try. If you want more unsolved mysteries from history and science, subscribe and we'll keep investigating.